My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32, and last Christmas I walked into my parents' house already bracing myself. You know that feeling when your family measures your worth by the car you drive or the title on your paycheck, and you're the one who never quite fits? That night, my brother wasted no time mocking me in front of everyone. I thought it would be another holiday where I swallowed it and smiled. But something happened that none of us saw coming, something that turned the whole room upside down. And when it did, the silence that followed was louder than any laughter. Have you ever wondered what it would take for your family to finally see you for who you really are? Snow had been falling all afternoon, turning Cleveland into a quiet gray city under a white blanket. By the time my rideshare pulled up to my parents' house, Christmas lights glowed across the street. The Carter house stood out, every bulb sharp against the night. For most people, it might have looked cheerful. For me, it looked like a stage ready for judgment. The driveway was full, my parents' Subaru on one side, Michael's silver Tesla gleaming on the other like a trophy. Even before I saw him, I knew the car was his way of announcing victory. I grabbed my bag and stood there for a second. A year had passed since I came home, but the wait felt exactly the same. Inside, the heat and smells of roast ham and gingerbread wrapped around me. Voices layered over one another, Mom giving directions, Dad's booming laugh, Aunt Linda's softer tone. And then Michael's laugh, louder, practiced the sound of someone who needed to be noticed. Emily. Mom called from the kitchen without looking. Coats in the closet, shoes in the bin. Don't block the hall, Grace is bringing pie. Hi, Mom, I said, but she had already turned back to the oven. Michael appeared next. Perfect jacket hair combed just right, smile polished. He was 35, but carried himself like the quarterback who never stopped winning. His eyes scanned me, boots, coat, hair, and then the smirk came. Well, well, he said loud enough for everyone nearby. The unemployed have landed. A couple of laughs broke out. Rachel, his wife, came forward in a cream sweater dress and diamond studs. She kissed the air near my cheek. You look cozy, she said, a compliment wrapped in judgment. Thanks, I answered. It's winter. Grace, our youngest sister, sliced bread at the counter. She gave me a small, guilty smile, one that said she noticed but wouldn't interfere. Aunt Linda, though, came straight over and hugged me tightly. Good to see you, honey. You made it through the storm, she whispered. At that moment, she was the only shield in the room. Let's sit before the food cools, Dad announced. His cheer sounded real, but the way his eyes lingered on Michael's Tesla keys on the counter told another story. We took our usual seats. Dad at the head, Mom across from him. Michael to Dad's right, with Rachel beside him. Aunt Linda sat across Grace next to me. The table was set with china candles burning steadily, windows fogged from the heat. From the outside, it was picture perfect. Inside, it was already tense. Michael started the meal the way he always did, by taking the floor. Rates jumped this quarter, he said. But my desk outperformed. Closed a refinancing for Robertson Steel, you probably saw it. Dad's nod was immediate. Of course. Impressive. And the house, Mom added, glowing with pride. $500,000. Can you believe it? With the Tesla, too. Michael, you've really made us proud. Michael waved it off modestly. It's not about the car. I just like not paying for gas. Rachel tilted her wrist so the bracelet he'd given her caught the candlelight. He surprised me with this last week, she said, smiling at the diamonds. Feels good to enjoy the rewards of hard work. I moved green beans on my plate. No one asked what I'd been doing. Not the late nights helping kids in Lakewood, not the mural project drying in a school gym. Around this table, success was measured in houses and cars. Emily passed the rolls, Mom said, glancing my way for the first time. Then she turned back to Michael. Your colleagues must admire you with that new title. Michael smiled, pleased. They know the results when they see them. His eyes flicked to me briefly before he looked away. I tightened my grip on my glass. Aunt Linda raised hers slightly toward me, a private signal that I wasn't invisible. That quiet gesture steadied me. The conversation kept rolling, circling around Michael's job, Rachel's jewelry, and vacation plans. Grace stayed quiet. The cranberry sauce sat untouched, glowing red like an ornament no one needed. Then Dad lifted his glass for a toast. At that moment, Michael leaned toward me. His tone was casual, almost playful. "So, Em," he said, still jobless. The words hit the table like a dropped fork. The laughter stopped. Rachel's smile froze. Mom stared at her plate. Dad cleared his throat. A cousin chuckled nervously. I set my fork down on porcelain, the scrape loud in the silence. My pulse quickened, but I met his gaze straight on. Aunt Linda's hand brushed mine under the table, steadying me. Michael leaned back, pleased with himself. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. We worry, you know." Some people looked down at their plates. That was their way of agreeing without speaking. I drew a breath, heavy with time and heat. "Hello to you too," I said calmly. The room froze again. Rachel drank too quickly. Dad tapped his fork. Grace shifted uneasily. Michael only smiled wider, lifting his glass like he had won. Maybe the rest of them saw it as brotherly teasing. To me, it felt like a judgment. Sitting there surrounded by polished china and flickering candles, I knew this wasn't just dinner. It was a trial. And Michael had just called his first witness. By the time the sweet potatoes circled the table, the evening had settled into its rhythm, Michael in the spotlight, the rest of us filling the seats. Mom guided conversation like a conductor flicking her wrists. "Michael, how was the bank holiday party?" "Rachel, did you ever choose the backsplash tile?" Dad tell them about the HOA mess. Dad happily obliged, spinning a story about the neighbor's inflatable Santa collapsing across the property line. Everyone laughed on cue. I did too, mostly, because the image of Santa deflating onto the azaleas really was ridiculous. But Mom wasn't going to let the focus wander for long. "And how's that loan portfolio?" she asked Michael. Admiration thick in her voice. "$500,000 for the house, such a steal, and the neighborhood so safe." "Appraised above ask," Michael replied, smooth as the shine on his cufflink. "Tesla's just a perk from work. We have a charger in the garage. Efficient." Rachel placed a hand on his sleeve, with the kind of practiced grace you'd see in a magazine spread. "Show them the bracelet," she said, turning to me, before raising her wrist. Diamonds winked across the table. "He surprised me last week." It was nothing, Michael said, but his smile said otherwise. Every eye followed the sparkle on Rachel's arm. Then Mom pivoted. "Grace, you should take a page from Rachel's book, sweetie. Everything she does is so tidy." Grace pressed her fork into the marshmallow topping until it caved her voice flat. "Noted." And then it was my turn, though, only in the way teachers call on the quiet student who hasn't spoken. "And you, Emily, how is everything?" I knew that trick. Everything meant pick something safe. Not too personal, nothing that makes anyone uncomfortable. "Busy," I said. "We just finished a mobile pantry route that— Did you hear Michael ran the turkey trot?" Mom cut me off, her face glowing. 8-minute mile. 7:59, Michael corrected smoothly. But who's counting? Dad jumped in to pile on. "Tell them about your client dinner," he said, proud and paternal, giving Michael the kind of scaffolding that held him up higher than the rest of us could ever reach. "Not much to tell," Michael said with a shrug designed to invite questions. We closed. I stood up for the team. "You know how it is." "$500,000, Mom repeated again, almost reverent. "Such a blessing," Michael quipped. "Praise favorable interest rates," and even I cracked a smile. A good line was a good line. Still, the more the conversation circled him, the smaller I became. I passed dishes, said please and thank you, and filled water glasses. The more useful I made myself, the easier it was for them to leap right over my part in the story. Then Mom, maybe trying to sound generous, set her fork down and looked around the table like a general surveying the field. "Michael has everything lined up," she said warmly. "A good job, a beautiful home, a plan." Sometimes I wish she paused just for drama. I wish Emily had even half of that. The words hung there soft but heavy. A hush rose like steam. Aunt Linda's eyebrows lifted but didn't move further, like a bird deciding not to take off. Grace glanced at me, then back to her plate so quickly it felt like a flinch. "I have a lot," I said finally. My voice was steady when I wanted it to crack. Just different. Of course, Mom replied. Of course. She buttered a roll tenderly as if kindness balanced the sting. It's just, stability is nice. At your age. Rachel's cheeks glowed with a smug satisfaction. Stability is so undervalued, she chimed in. I tell my Pilates girls this all the time. Her words stung not because of what she said, but because she said it in alliance with Mom. Mom hadn't meant to be cruel. That made it worse. She'd reduced me to a fraction half of, and cloaked it in affection. Under the table, Grace brushed my knee with her hand, quick as a secret. Aunt Linda, refusing to let the silence win, turned to me. What's kept you busy lately? She asked gently. I opened my mouth, ready to talk about the kids in Lakewood, about the mural we'd painted together, about something that mattered. But Michael cut in, his timing flawless. I actually have some news, he announced, voice bright, pulling every gaze back to him like a magnet. We're exploring a new product line. I might lead the Cleveland initiative. The table came alive again, conversation buzzing like bees around honey. Oh, honey, Mom said, her eyes shining as if Rachel's bracelet had lit them up. That would be amazing. And just like that, my story folded back inside me, waiting for another day. That's what happens when no one asks you. Learn to keep your stories quiet. The mashed potatoes came the way they always did in our family, skins left on butter, heavy beaten until they were clouds. I spooned them onto my plate and ate them like memory, as if food could patch over an emptiness that had nothing to do with hunger. 3 Christmases ago, I had walked away from a job with a cubicle, a badge, and fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly. There hadn't been a dramatic blow-up. No shouting boss, no broken copier. Just me at my desk one morning, realizing I could not sell my energy to a spreadsheet that meant nothing to me. My resignation came in a quiet Word document, and my hand was steady when I typed it. Mom had cried. Dad frowned the way mortgage-paying men do. Michael had called it impulsive, sliding me an article about how women negotiate poorly. Rachel had sent a podcast titled, Find Your Passion. I never hit play. My passion then was walking out the door. And I did. For months I drifted until the community center in Lakewood became my anchor. The pay was scraps at first, stipends, grants, small projects, but the work was alive. Kids needed homework. Help parents needed food boxes. Neighborhoods needed someone to remember their names. I learned the geography of need in that city. Which schools bent rules for the right reasons, which grocers would slip extra cans into donation bins. I wrote proposals that sounded like prayers. Sometimes they were answered. The first Thanksgiving after I quit, Michael raised a glass to the family and said some of us were making bold moves while others were still finding themselves. The room laughed. I held my smile like a bandage pressed against a wound. Grace followed me out to the porch that night, the cold air, sharp pine wreath still hanging from November. It's not fair, she whispered. You're the bravest person I know. I'm just the one who made a choice, I told her. If I let her call me brave, I'd have to wear the cape, and I didn't want capes. I wanted quiet. Tonight, as Michael ticked off his new promotions and Mom nodded like an audience, I could hear that old laughter again. Every nod from Dad replayed the moment he had looked away when I told him I'd be fine. He hadn't called me a liar, but he hadn't asked for proof either. Old hurts circled the table like ghosts waiting for their cue. Aunt Linda leaned in. You know, she murmured, my father didn't speak to me for 3 months after I chose nursing instead of med school. He told the neighbors I was just taking time off. Then one day a patient told me I'd saved his life. That was the voice I decided to believe. I remember I said softly, You told me that when I was 9. She smiled. And I'll tell you again. Because 32 is just 9, but with taxes. I laughed an actual laugh, and it startled me. Rachel turned her head, quickly, surprised, like she'd heard a wrong note in an orchestra that somehow worked. Then Michael, always needing to reclaim the spotlight, leaned forward. So, what do you actually do now? Day to day. I set my fork down. He had asked a question, but his smirk made sure it wasn't clean. I coordinate mentorship programs, I said evenly. Tutoring, skill-building, job prep. We run a mobile pantry route. I'm on a crisis response team. It's work. He tilted his head like he was appraising a stray. But that's not a real job. It is work, Aunt Linda said quickly, her voice steady but kind. Michael didn't bother to respond. He had already turned back to his plate. For a moment silence stretched. I tasted the bitterness that had lived in me for years, the same bitterness that had followed me onto porches and into empty bedrooms after holiday dinners. But tonight I recognized it, and because I recognized it, I refused to swallow it whole. I set my glass down. The clink was louder than I expected. Grace's eyes darted to mine, then down again. Rachel smiled faintly as if pleased that Michael had landed another point. Mom smoothed her napkin and avoided my gaze. In that pause, I breathed. Old wounds had spoken, but they didn't get to close the chapter. Somewhere in the living room, the TV glowed quietly, its screen waiting. I didn't know then what it would deliver, only that for once something outside this table might give me back a voice. And I was ready to hear it. Dad sharpened the carving knife like the turkey demanded precision. The rasp of steel filled the room, slowing every fork and breath until silence wrapped itself around us. Ritual has that power even in families that rarely pray. The first slice fell. Michael cleared his throat softly, just shy of modest, and the table tipped its attention his way. I actually have some news, he said, lowering his eyes as if the words embarrassed him. My team at the bank exceeded targets. I took a point on a restructuring deal, closed it with a margin I'm proud of. The VP hinted, more than hinted, that I'll be stepping into leadership next year. Mom's gasp came out like steam escaping a kettle. Michael. Rachel raised her wrist, the bracelet shooting shards of light across the table. He's being modest. The bonus was generous. Grace kept her eyes on the potatoes she'd sculpted into hills and valleys. Congrats, she murmured, voice neutral enough to be either supportive or tired. Michael wasn't finished. He lifted his wine glass, swirling it the way you'd swirl fortunes in tea leaves. Made some moves earlier than consensus. A couple positions. Nothing crazy. You just have to pay attention. Dad nodded. Mom glowed. The table hummed with approval. Aunt Linda's hand found mine under the linen. When I chose nursing, she said conversationally, her words meant for everyone, my cousin told me I was settling. Then he called me from the ER when his daughter was sick. Funny how that works. Michael laughed. We need all kinds, Aunt Elle. Healthcare finance tech. Emily's community thing. The phrase hung in the air like something dropped in soup bobbing without flavor. He could have said program. He could have said outreach. He chose things. I tucked it away like evidence. Rachel leaned toward him, perfume light as clean tile. Michael's stamina is incredible. He's up at 5 in the office by 7, still home in time to cook. Discipline, Michael added, flashing me a grin that landed like a coach's pep talk to the bench warmer. You ever think about structure M routines? I have them, I answered. They just don't look like yours. What do they look like? His tone was smooth, offering rope while making sure I'd tangle in it. Images came fast. The mother with 2 jobs, needing a ride to the clinic, the boy who flinched at a balloon pop, the girl who needed FAFSA explained in her first language. They look like calls at 11 p.m., I said. Early mornings packing boxes. Circles of folding chairs. People who thought they didn't matter found out they do. Michael smiled the way you do when someone says something you didn't plan to respect. He raised his glass and let his voice travel the table. It's good you're keeping busy, but you're still unemployed, right? The laughter came small but sharp, rippling like a tide that didn't need to be a wave to sting. Rachel didn't laugh outright. She smirked into her glass. That smirk was enough. My chest tightened, the kind of ache that comes from pressing on an old bruise. I searched the table. Mom's lips pinched into a line. Dad's jaw asked me silently to let it go. Aunt Linda lifted her hand, slightly the referee without whistle. Michael, she said softly. That's enough. It's a joke, he replied. We tease each other. Always have. Grace's fork chimed against her plate, one clean note. Her eyes flicked to mine, held then dropped. A signal, not yet. I stood without meaning to. Chair legs scraped the floor, a violin string caught mid-cry. The room froze. "Excuse me," I said, voice, even though my skin buzzed. I crossed into the living room 5 steps and stopped in front of the television. The screen glowed quiet blue, paused earlier on a news segment. Dad must have left running. Behind me, Michael's voice picked up like nothing had happened, smooth as sports commentary. "She's sensitive," Rachel murmured. Mom shushed her softer still. And then the TV unmuted itself when my knee brushed the remote. Headlines scrolled, then a segment rolled, "Year-End Community Heroes." The anchor's tone softened, reverent. Faces flashed across the screen. First a teacher with a coat drive, then a bus driver who pulled a child from a snowbank, and then me. Not curated, not holiday polished. Just grainy phone footage from that day in Lakewood. The rush of bodies, the chaos, my frame moving without pause toward 2 kids in danger. A still shot followed my hand on a boy's shoulder, both of us trembling. Local Hero Award 2022. The reporter's voice lifted, for quick thinking and extraordinary courage. Behind me, silverware hit porcelain. Feet shifted. The air thickened into a hush. "That's Emily," someone whispered. It was David Collins, the neighborhood reporter Mom had invited out of habit. He stared at the screen, stunned. "That's her." The room tilted. The story I had kept quiet. The story I'd never planned to tell here filled my parents' living room in high definition. I had wanted an invisible Christmas. Instead, the TV handed me a public one. My face was the headline now, and there was no hiding. The living room was dim, washed in the blue glow of the paused TV. I stood in it, my reflection faint in the dark glass, while the chatter from the dining room wavered like a signal slipping in and out. Behind me, forks scraped plates, laughter tried to recover, but the rhythm had cracked. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me to come back, to sit down, to laugh along, to shrink myself into the role they'd always assigned the sister who couldn't quite keep up. But my body refused. My chest tightened, in the kind of way you only get from carrying years of swallowed words. Silence doesn't just happen in a family, it grows. It thickens until it presses on you louder than any shout. That night it filled the Carter house like smoke. I caught Dad rubbing the edge of his jaw the same way he always did when he disapproved but didn't want to fight. His eyes stayed on his plate, heavy with judgment he wouldn't speak out loud. Mom sighed into her napkin, a sound so soft but sharp enough to slice. To her, I wasn't resisting, I was embarrassing her. Aunt Linda didn't move. She sat with her wineglass in hand, her bracelets glinting faintly, her eyes steady on me as if she knew this silence wasn't mine to carry alone. Grace at the far end of the table looked smaller than usual. Her fork sat anchored in mashed potatoes she wasn't eating, her shoulders tense like she was carrying my weight alongside her own. She didn't look at me, but I felt her. That unspoken sister's language, "I'm here, but I'm scared too." I wanted to speak. God, I wanted to. I wanted to tell them what my life actually looked like. To show them the mornings spent loading boxes into vans, the nights explaining FAFSA forms to worried parents. The kids who clung to me because they didn't have anyone else to ask. I wanted them to see that I wasn't a failure. I was building something, just not the kind of something they valued. But I knew if I spoke, then the words would drop like stones into water. They wouldn't ripple. They wouldn't move anyone. So I stayed quiet. My hand brushed the armrest of the couch. I thought about escaping upstairs to the guest room, letting them finish their meal in peace, letting the silence swallow me whole. I had done that before, too many times, and that was when the sound broke through. The TV blinked alive, its black screen jumping into color. A voice clear and formal carried into the room, "Tonight we honor our local heroes." Everyone turned toward the screen. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered. The silence shifted now, tethered to the glow from the television. I stiffened, realizing too late what was happening. The segment was short, just a reel of faces the city had decided were worth remembering. A teacher who started a breakfast program. A bus driver who pulled a child out of traffic. Their names scrolled across the bottom of the screen in neat white letters. And then me. The image was grainy, pulled from cell phone footage 2 years old. I froze as my own face appeared, caught in motion. That day in Lakewood rose up in me like a wave. The hallways echoed with panic kids too small to know where to run a boy with fear and a weapon he should never have had. I hadn't thought. I had just moved, pulling two kids into a classroom, holding the door standing in the gap while chaos tore through the corridor. Someone's phone had captured it, shaky but undeniable. Months later, the mayor had said my name at a podium, but I had avoided the spotlight. I hadn't wanted to be a story. Now the story has come for me. Emily Carter. The anchor's voice carried into the dining room warm reverent. Recipient of the Local Hero Award 2022, recognized for extraordinary courage during the Lakewood school shooting. The photo that followed made my throat tighten. Me awkward in the stage lights, a plaque in my hands, the kids from the center cheering in the front row. I had wanted to disappear even then. Tonight I couldn't. The gasp came first from someone at the table I barely knew, one of Mom's friends. Then whispers rippled, names tumbling out like marbles. That's Emily. Our Emily. Oh my God. And then David Collins, the neighbor, the part-time reporter, exhaled sharply, loud enough for everyone to hear. Holy! He cut himself off, hand to his mouth, but the words slipped anyway, reverent and raw. That's Emily. The silence shifted again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. For the first time all night, every eye in that room was on me, and none of them looked away. Michael's fork clattered onto his plate. Rachel's bracelet slid against the table as she shifted, color rising in her face. Mom pressed her napkin to her lips. Dad stared, blinking as though he was recalibrating who I was. I stood there in the blue glow, the story playing on without me. I didn't have to say a word. The TV had done it for me. And in that moment I realized something I had never believed before. Sometimes vindication doesn't arrive in arguments or defenses. Sometimes it arrives in 3 minutes of broadcast undeniable, while your family has no choice but to watch. The television flickered back to life like it had been waiting for its cue. The program was a year-end special, just a 3-minute segment highlighting local stories the city thought worth celebrating. A teacher who'd built a free breakfast program, a bus driver who'd pulled a child out of traffic. Smiles, applause, gratitude. And then the reel shifted. I stopped breathing. The image was grainy, captured from someone's phone 2 years ago in Lakewood. That day had never left me. A hallway full of panicked children too young to know where to run. A boy holding something that shouldn't have been in his hands. I hadn't paused. I had grabbed 2 kids and pulled them into a classroom, shoving the door shut while chaos spun behind us. It wasn't a decision, not something I thought through. It was instinct. Now here it was, replayed on a screen in my parents' living room. The anchor's voice filled the room, warm and deliberate. Emily Carter, recipient of the Local Hero Award 2022, recognized for extraordinary courage during the Lakewood school incident. My face appeared next, frozen in a photo I had long tried to forget. Me on a stage, awkward in borrowed heels, holding a plaque while spotlights glared in my eyes. In the front row, kids from the community center had clapped until their palms turned red. The anchor continued. Since that day, Emily has dedicated her time to youth mentorship programs, food distribution efforts, and crisis support across Cleveland. Her work has touched hundreds of families. A gasp cut through the room. Not from family, at least not at first. One of the neighbors who'd been invited, a woman I only half remembered, let out a breathless, "Oh my God!" Then came the murmur, a tide of disbelief rolling across the table. That's Emily. Our Emily. I heard my name repeated like it belonged to someone else. And then, sharp enough to crack the silence, David Collins, the neighbor who freelanced for the local paper, the one who always brought a camera to block parties, let slip, "Holy shit. That's Emily." His voice rang with awe. Not insult, but the words hung heavy in the hushed air. Chairs scraped softly as people leaned toward the television. Forks hovered forgotten. For the first time all night, every pair of eyes fixed on me. My mother's hand fluttered to her mouth, napkin trembling between her fingers. My father blinked hard, his jaw tightening in a way I had seen before only at funerals. Grace's fork clattered against her plate as if she'd lost hold of it. Aunt Linda whispered something like a prayer, though I couldn't catch the words. and Michael's face drained in slow motion. His glass paused halfway to his lips. For a man who always had a speech ready, he was suddenly silent. The footage kept rolling. A shot of me outside the community center, hair tied back, handing out bags of groceries. Another clip of me sitting cross-legged on the floor with kids' crayons scattered between us, teaching them how to map their neighborhood in bright chalk colors. Each frame pushed the air tighter in the room. I felt my pulse in my throat steady and loud. This was the story. I had never told my family the part of my life I'd kept separate. They had never asked. And now the whole truth was playing in 1080p in their living room, leaving no room for dismissal. The anchor closed with the line that cinched it. In times of crisis, we find who we can count on. Cleveland counts on Emily Carter. The screen faded to black, the silence so dense it felt physical. Then the TV rolled into another segment, but no one noticed. I became the news. Mom broke first. Emily, her voice cracked like something delicate had given way. Why didn't you tell us? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How do you explain years of being measured against someone else's success? How do you say you wanted a corner of peace without having to defend it like a case in court? Before I could speak, Michael finally set down his glass. The base hit the table harder than it needed to. His jaw worked, but no words came. It was Rachel who broke the tension for him, reaching for his hand with fingers too deliberate. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, calculating. The silence stretched long enough for the clink of the radiator to fill it. Grace leaned close, her voice low, meant only for me. They'll never see you the same way again. I nodded faintly, though I wasn't sure if she meant it as comfort or warning. Behind me, the muted screen replayed my name in the ticker, scrolling again and again, Local Hero Award, Emily Carter. And sitting there with the weight of their stares pressing in, I understood something I hadn't before. The verdict Michael had tried to pass earlier, the one about me being still jobless, had just been overturned. The jury wasn't in his favor anymore. The room had shifted, and I was no longer the one on trial. The silence carried more weight than any applause I had ever heard. It pressed down on the room, thick, unrelenting. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I turned slowly back toward the table. Michael was still in his chair, his fingers curled around the stem of his wineglass. For a moment he looked carved out of stone jaw, tight eyes locked on the screen. Then, as if his body betrayed him, the glass slipped. It shattered against the hardwood in an explosion of sound. Red wine splashed across the pale carpet, staining it in branching streaks that crept outward like cracks in ice. The mess spread irreversible, undeniable. Nobody laughed this time. Rachel flinched, pulling her hands into her lap as if the spill might jump onto her. Her face flushed crimson, not from embarrassment for him, but from something sharper. She turned her head as though if she looked away, she could detach herself from the orbit of his humiliation. Mom raised her napkin to her mouth, eyes wide. Her hand trembled just enough that I noticed. Emily. She whispered the name shaped like a confession. You truly did that, her voice cracked on the last word. I thought of all the times she had stayed composed when Michael boasted about his 6-figure bonus, when she had reduced my efforts to half of what he has, when she treated me like an afterthought. She hadn't cracked then. But now seeing me on a screen recognized by strangers, her composure finally broke. Dad's gaze was steady, his face unreadable at first. Then I saw it, the recalibration, the rewiring. The way he blinked, slow and deliberate, like he was adjusting the image of me he had carried for years. I couldn't speak. My throat felt sealed, as though the words I had saved up for a decade had been locked away behind iron. On the screen, the footage continued. A child crying into my shoulder. My hand rested lightly on his back as reporters swarmed with microphones I had refused to touch. I had declined every interview back then, desperate not to be turned into a spectacle. But now the spectacle had forced its way into my parents' living room, uninvited and uncontainable. Michael swallowed. Adam's apple jerked once, then again. His face had lost all color, drained pale under the warm glow of the Christmas candles. He opened his mouth, and what came out was a sound halfway between a laugh and a choke. That's edited, he stammered, forcing the words out. Probably, A coincidence. Lots of people named Emily Carter. Nobody believed him. The room stayed still except for the faint clinking of forks as someone nervously adjusted silverware. The lies landed flat, heavy, lifeless. His denial couldn't compete with the clarity of my face on the screen. Aunt Linda leaned forward, her bracelets catching the light. "Michael," she said softly, but her tone carried weight. "That's your sister." Grace, who had been silent through most of the evening, let out a quiet, shaky laugh. Not cruel, just astonished. She looked at Michael, then at me, then back again. "It's her. We all know it's her." Rachel's lips parted, but no words followed. She pressed them shut again, hiding behind the rim of her wine glass. For years, Michael had carried himself like the only star in the Carter family orbit. His job, his car, his house, his success, all of it had been staged for applause. And now, with one unexpected broadcast, his spotlight had slipped. The weight of silence turned into something else, a shift, a realignment. For the first time, he wasn't untouchable. His grip on the room had faltered. I sat still, the heat from the fireplace brushing the side of my face. Every instinct told me to shrink, to disappear, to make this moment smaller so the room could breathe again. But I stayed. I let it hang in the air, let them look at me, let Michael sit in the ruins of his own performance. The footage looped again, replaying the same clips. My name scrolls across the ticker at the bottom of the screen again and again. Emily Carter. Emily Carter. Emily Carter. Michael lowered his eyes, staring at the red stain blooming on the carpet, as if it might swallow him whole. For once, his silence was louder than anything he had ever bragged about. The room felt altered, like someone had tilted the house and let the air spill out before replacing it with something entirely new. It wasn't loud, not like the laughter that usually followed Michael's stories. It was quieter, heavier, the kind of quiet that rearranges the furniture of a family without moving a single chair. Aunt Linda rose first. She didn't hesitate, didn't glance around for permission. Her footsteps sounded deliberate on the hardwood, and then she was in front of me, wrapping me in the kind of embrace that leaves no room for doubt. Her voice brushed against my ear, low but strong. "Now they see you," she whispered. Her words landed like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples I couldn't control. Around us, murmurs began to stir. Guests who had barely acknowledged me earlier now leaned toward one another, voices carrying words I had never heard directed at me in this house. Amazing. Incredible. I had no idea. A neighbor from across the street who once asked Michael to recommend a mortgage lender but had never asked me anything actually clapped softly, like the news anchor might reappear if he made enough noise. Dad stayed in his chair, but I saw him shrink in it, his shoulders folding in like paper. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, as though the weight of every dinner table judgment had come back to sit in his lap. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, blotting tears that seemed half pride, half something else. Guilt maybe, or the sting of realizing she had underestimated her own daughter. She tried to smile, but it bent at the edges, unsteady. Rachel twisted her bracelet again and again, the diamonds scattering light too brightly against the subdued hush. The sparkle looked out of place now, like sequins at a funeral. Her eyes never met mine. She kept them fixed on her lap, as if to say she hadn't chosen this stage, hadn't agreed to this scene. And Michael, my brother who had greeted me with mockery less than an hour ago, sat stiff as a statue. His face was blotched red, his pride draining faster than the spilled wine had seeped into the carpet. He tried to form words, but his voice betrayed him, trembling. "It's not," he stuttered. "She's exaggerating. People overhype these things." The denial hung there, fragile, a balloon already losing air. Nobody reached to grab it. Nobody gave him the nods of approval he had come to expect. For once, the room wasn't listening to him. I stayed still, my hands folded in front of me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't expected to explain myself, to justify my choices, to defend my worth. The story had been told already on a screen by strangers, with footage no one could argue against. Michael shifted in his seat, desperate for the spotlight that had abandoned him. His hand twitched toward his glass, but the shattered one at his feet reminded everyone of the moment he had lost it. He muttered something about editing, about television exaggeration, but the words sounded hollow. Aunt Linda kept her hand on my back steady and sure. Grace finally lifted her head, her eyes catching mine across the table. She smiled a small private smile, but it was enough to tell me she had been waiting for this. That somewhere inside her she had always known. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was waiting. Waiting for me. And that's when it hit me. Sometimes vindication doesn't arrive with raised voices or long speeches. It doesn't storm in through arguments or defenses. Sometimes it arrives as quiet proof playing across a television in your parents' living room, undeniable, unspinnable, forcing everyone who doubted you to watch without a chance to look away. I hadn't asked for this moment. I hadn't planned it. But standing there in the thick of it, I understood it was mine. And there was no going back. The television clicked into silence, cutting off mid-sentence. The screen froze on my face, awkward, grainy, paused beneath the anchor's headline. The room held its breath. Forks hovered. Eyes darted, but no one dared to speak first. And then Grace moved. The sound was tiny at first, her fork set down with a deliberate clink that carried more weight than Michael's broken glass had minutes earlier. She stood slowly smoothing the skirt of her dark sweater dress, like someone gathering armor, not fabric. Her shoulders rose with a deep inhale, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembled just for a heartbeat before finding a strength none of us had ever heard from her before. Enough. It sliced through the hush. She didn't shout, but she didn't need to. The word itself seemed to rearrange the air. I've watched this for years, she continued, her tone stronger now, carrying across the table. Michael tearing Emily down. Mom and Dad pretending it's harmless. Rachel adding her little jabs, always with that smile. Her eyes flicked across the table, sharp as broken glass, catching each person she named. I've kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to be next. But I can't anymore. The hush deepened into something brittle. No one moved. Even the candles seemed to hold their flames steadier as though listening. Grace turned toward me, her face softening, her voice shifting from accusation to loyalty. Emily, I've seen what you've done. I follow every program, every post. I've been to the center. I've seen the kids who look up to you. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she straightened her chin, lifting with a conviction that seemed to grow taller than her frame. She pivoted back to Michael. And I am proud of you, she said to me before turning her sharp gaze back at him. Michael, you should be ashamed. The words hit like stones thrown into a still pond. Shock rippled outward, disturbing every carefully balanced face around the table. For years, Michael had been untouchable, his arrogance cushioned by parental approval, his cruelty excused as banter. Grace's defiance cracked the surface. Mom whispered Grace, but her voice lacked the steel it usually carried. She sounded like a mother pleading, not commanding. Grace didn't flinch. She squared her shoulders the way I'd seen her do in high school when she stepped onto a debate stage, nerves masked by resolve. I mean it. Tonight you mocked her in front of everyone. You laughed while she swallowed it like always. And now, thanks to that screen, we all see who really deserves respect. Rachel shifted in her chair, her bracelet tinkling against the table as she tried to busy her hands. But the gesture was nervous, not triumphant. Her usual air of superiority had wilted under Grace's words. Dad's hand clenched around his napkin, knuckles white. He opened his mouth as though to meditate, then closed it again. For once, he had nothing to offer. No joke, no deflection. Michael's jaw worked, but nothing came out. His usual arsenal, sarcasm, charm, numbers, and titles sounded hollow before he even spoke them. He sat rigid, face pale, caught between fury and humiliation. Aunt Linda leaned back, studying Grace with something close to awe. Well, she said quietly, but with a kind of finality, there it is. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full-charged. I sat frozen, my breath tight in my chest. I had learned to live without allies at this table, to armor myself in invisibility. And now Grace, my little sister, who had spent so much of her life blending into the background, had stood up and spoken the words I had never dared to demand. My throat burned. Not from pain, from something closer to gratitude, raw and overdue. I hadn't expected it to come from her, and maybe that's why it struck so deep. Grace sat down slowly, but the weight of her words didn't leave the room. They hung there undeniable, hovering over Michael's shattered glass, over Rachel's silence, over our parents' stunned faces. And for the first time in years, the balance of power at that table shifted, not because of me, but because of her. The night wasn't over, but the ground beneath us had already changed. Michael laughed sharp and brittle, the sound of glass underfoot. It wasn't joy, not even amusement, it was panic, dressed up in bravado. He leaned forward, wine still dripping from where the stem of his glass had shattered earlier. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to disguise it with a dismissive wave. "Come on," he said, voice pitched too high. "You can't honestly believe this makes her some kind of hero. She quit a stable job. She's been drifting for years. One award, one lucky break doesn't erase a lifetime of irresponsibility." The words scratched the air, desperate, each syllable sharp enough to sting. He glanced around the table, scanning for nods for allies. His eyes landed on Dad, then Mom, then Rachel, searching for someone, anyone to throw him a rope. None came. The silence pressed back against him. For the first time, his voice didn't fill the room. It bounced off the walls and fell flat. David Collins cleared his throat. The neighbor, the casual guest, the man with the camera, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low but steady. "I was there that day," he said, his gaze fixed on Michael like a verdict. "I covered the story. I saw it with my own eyes. Your sister saved lives." He paused, let the words land. "That's not drifting. That's courage. The kind most of us pray we'd have if the moment ever came." A ripple moved across the table, not of laughter this time, but of recognition. Something in the air had shifted, and it tilted away from Michael. Michael's jaw twitched. His mouth opened, then closed. He tried again, lips moving, but no words came. For a man who always had a ready quip, a story, a statistic, his silence was louder than any argument he could have made. Rachel shifted in her seat, cheeks flushed red. Her fingers worried the edge of her napkin until it frayed. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Michael either. Her eyes stayed fixed downward, as if the embroidered hem could rescue her. Mom's lips parted, then closed, then parted again. She looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen in years, uncertain, almost searching. Dad leaned back in his chair, his usual composure unraveling. He fiddled with his watch, then his cuff, then stilled his gaze trained on his son with quiet disappointment. Michael's mask cracked. I saw the shield of superiority he'd polished for years, the armor of titles, bonuses, cars, and square footage. All of it fissured in an instant, leaving the man beneath exposed. He didn't look powerful. He didn't look untouchable. He looked small, fragile, humans. And for the first time, I didn't feel crushed by him. I didn't feel like the younger sister was overshadowed or the failure in the family story. I felt steady. Not triumphant, just steady, as if the ground beneath me finally belonged to me again. Grace reached across the table, her hand brushing mine with a squeeze meant for me alone. Aunt Linda nodded once, her bracelets chiming softly, a private applause in the silence. Michael tried again, voice breaking this time. She's just been lucky. You don't know the whole picture. Emily's choices. Her choices saved children. David interrupted firmly. That's the whole picture. No one contradicted him. Michael sank back in his chair, eyes darting, throat working, like he was swallowing something bitter. He looked around once more, searching for the certainty that had always been his. It wasn't there anymore. For years he had cast shadows across this table, and tonight, for the first time, the light had shifted. It didn't fall on him. It fell on me. And he couldn't stand the sight of it. The dining room no longer belonged to Michael. For as long as I could remember, he had commanded it, his stories, his laughter, his smugness, filling every inch until the rest of us shrank in the shadows. But that night the air itself shifted. He sat small at the far end of the table, while the weight of the room pressed down on him instead of lifting him up. The guests exchanged glances, quiet but unmistakable. I read them easily: disappointment, disapproval, even a little pity. Not directed at me, never at me this time, but at Michael. The golden sun, who had always been praised, now looked tarnished, his shine gone dull under the harsh light of truth. Mom. Mom folded her napkin slowly, as though it had suddenly become the most fragile piece of fabric in the world. Her fingers trembled, not from age, but from the realization crawling through her. She lifted her eyes to Dad. He met them silent. They didn't need words. Their faces said it clearly enough. We were wrong. The admission didn't come out loud. It didn't need to. For once, their silence wasn't a shield for Michael, it was an indictment. Aunt Linda didn't bother with silence. She straightened in her chair, eyes firm, voice carrying through the air like a bell. Michael, she said, no softness in it. Mocking your sister while she was out there saving children, that's not just careless. That's shameful. The word hung there heavy. Michael flinched. His hand twitched toward the shards of his broken wine glass on the floor, as if forgetting it was gone. His fingers hovered empty before falling uselessly into his lap. For once, no one rushed to smooth over his mistake. Not even Mom. Rachel cleared her throat, a brittle sound. Excuse me? She murmured, eyes down. She pushed back her chair and left the table, her heels clattering down the hall. Each sharp step echoed like a drumbeat of embarrassment. She hadn't defended him. She hadn't defended me either. She had simply fled, abandoning the man who had always been her stage. Michael sat alone, his face pale under the glow of the chandelier. He tried to smile, tried to summon that easy confidence he wore like cologne. But it didn't come. His jaw worked, his mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing left. Dad cleared his throat, breaking the silence, though his words were directed at me, not at Michael. Emily, he said carefully, we didn't know. You never told us. I lifted my gaze steady. You never asked. That landed harder than I expected. Mom's face crumpled, her eyes wet. Dad's shoulders sagged. For years they had propped up Michael, feeding his pride while brushing me to the side. Now the weight of that choice settled on them. Guests began murmuring, voices rippling around the table. She's incredible, one said softly. I had no idea, said another. Compliments, astonishment, respect, all things I had never been given in this house were now spilling freely, aimed at me. Michael's knuckles whitened around his fork. He looked like he wanted to shout, to claw back the attention. But the current had turned, and nothing he said could reverse it. Aunt Linda leaned forward, her bracelets chiming as if punctuating her words. Respect, she said. Looking at me is earned by what you do when no one is watching. And Emily has done more than any of us realized. That deserves acknowledgement. I swallowed hard. For a moment, the years of being belittled, overlooked, second-guessed, all of it pressed against me. And then just as quickly it lifted. Because justice had arrived. Not in fiery speeches or loud confrontations. Not even in my own defense. It arrived quietly, undeniably, in the way the room turned its back on Michael and faced me instead. For the first time, I didn't need to fight for a place at this table. The table itself had shifted to make room for me. And Michael, once the center of it all, sat in the coldest corner, left with nothing but his own broken reflection. I didn't need to argue anymore. I didn't need to defend myself or prove my worth at that table. The truth had spoken louder than anything I could have said, and it wasn't coming from me, it had come from that television screen, from the voices of strangers who had seen what I had done. Dinner continued, but the air was different. The chatter softened, the laughter subdued. For the first time in years, people turned to me with questions not about Michael's latest deal, not about Rachel's bracelet, not about the square footage of some new house. They asked me about the kids at the center, about the programs, about the food drives and the workshops. What are the kids like? Most one of Mom's friends leaned forward, her tone almost eager. They like it when someone shows up for them, I said simply. Homework, help learning to fix a bike, painting a mural together. It's not about what we do, it's about being there. There was no need to flourish, no need for bragging. The truth stood steady on its own. Grace slid her hand under the table, her fingers brushing mine in a silent promise. I see you. I'm with you. That gesture carried more weight than all the diamonds Rachel had flashed that evening. Aunt Linda leaned close, her voice low but strong. "You carried yourself with dignity," she whispered. "Let them sit with their shame. That's their work to do now, not yours." Her words wrapped around me like a shield. For once I didn't feel exposed. I felt whole. Dad cleared his throat. Once, twice. His fork scraped against porcelain as though it might buy him time. He looked at me, eyes uncertain, as if groping for words he had never practiced saying. An apology lingered there unfinished. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, her gaze fixed firmly on her plate. She didn't look up. Maybe she couldn't. The woman who had measured me against Michael for years now had to reckon with a truth she hadn't made space for. I didn't push them. I didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. The food moved around the table, but the hierarchy had collapsed. Michael sat stiff, cheeks drained of color. Rachel hadn't returned from wherever she had hidden herself. The guests avoided his gaze, their small talk drifting toward me instead. For the first time in that house, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the afterthought, and yet I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk the way Michael would have. I simply answered their questions one by one, my voice, even my shoulders light. Vindication didn't feel loud. It felt like a release. When the last plate was cleared, I rose first. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood. I smoothed my coat from the back of the chair and slipped my arms into the sleeves. The fabric felt familiar, like an old friend waiting patiently for me to return. "Emily," Mom said suddenly, her voice thin. I paused at the doorway. She didn't continue. She only pressed her napkin to her lips and nodded once small, as though trying to give me something but unable to form it into words. I nodded back. That was enough for now. I thanked the guests as I moved past them, a small smile on my lips. They watched me differently now, their eyes softer, curious, even admiring. For once, I didn't shrink under it. At the front door, I pushed it open and the cold night air rushed in. Snow was still falling, steady, soft. It clung to the porch railing, it covered the driveway. It erased the marks of the cars outside. The whole street shimmered under a fresh layer of white. The cold kissed my cheeks, sharp but cleansing. I stepped onto the porch, my boots crunching in the powder, the air biting but somehow kind. For the first time in years, I walked outside without carrying the weight of their judgment on my back. Behind me, the house buzzed with whispers, confused, regretful, unfinished conversations still hanging in the air. That was theirs to sort out, not mine. Ahead of me, the night stretched wide open and waiting. I smiled. Not for them, not for the guests still inside, not for Michael sulking in his corner. I smiled for myself, for the younger version of me who had once believed she would never be seen, for the woman I had become who finally knew she didn't need their permission to exist. And if my voice could have carried through every home where someone sat, dismissed, overlooked, or belittled by the people who should have loved them most, I would have said this: if your family ever mocks you, don't despair. Truth has its own way of arriving. Sometimes it comes quietly, sometimes in the very moment they least expect it. And when it does, you won't need to fight for your place anymore. It will already—
"You get nothing." Amanda's voice echoed through my living room as she waved the wedding invitation in my face. "James is marrying Olivia next month, and guess what? No divorce, no property division. You're just getting kicked to the curb." She was practically bouncing with glee as she delivered the news that my husband of 8 years planned to marry his mistress without divorcing me first. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the familiar warmth steady my hands. "Thanks for telling me," I replied calmly, watching confusion flicker across my sister-in-law's face. She clearly expected tears, maybe some screaming or begging. Instead, she got a smile that seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. "My name is Sofia Martinez, and at 34, I had just learned that my husband thought he could start a new life without legally ending our marriage." What Amanda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for the past 6 months. "That's it," Amanda pressed, clearly disappointed by my lack of reaction. "Did you hear what I said? James is marrying Olivia. The ceremony's already planned. Their new house is being renovated. You're nothing to him now." I set my coffee cup down carefully. I heard you perfectly. Is there anything else? Amanda's triumphant smile faltered. This wasn't going according to her script. She'd always been like this, taking pleasure in delivering bad news, especially to me. From the moment I married her precious brother, I was never good enough for their family. You're being weird, she said, narrowing her eyes. Why aren't you upset? James is replacing you with someone younger, prettier, from a better family. You should be crying. I thought about the last 6 months, about the quiet preparations I'd made after finding lipstick on James's collar. Such a cliché, really. The late-night calls, the suspicious business trips, the sudden need for privacy with his phone. I remembered the moment I found messages between him and Olivia, planning their future while plotting to leave me with nothing. But I also remembered my grandmother's words from years ago. The smartest players are the ones who let others think they're losing. Amanda, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I appreciate you taking the time to deliver the news personally. She took a step back, thrown by my composure. You're up to something, she accused. I know you. You're planning some kind of scene at the wedding, aren't you? I laughed softly. No scenes. No drama. I genuinely hope James and Olivia will be very happy together. Mom was right about you. Amanda spat, gathering her designer purse. You never deserved James. You're not even fighting for him. As she stormed toward the door, I called after her. Amanda, tell James congratulations from me. The door slammed behind her, and I waited until I heard her car start before pulling out my phone. With steady fingers, I dialed a number I'd memorized months ago. Mr. Wilson, it's Sophia. Everything's proceeding exactly as we expected. They've set a wedding date for next month. I paused, listening to his response. Yes, Amanda just left. She was kind enough to show me the invitation. No, they still have no idea. Yes, I think it's time to move forward with the next phase. I hung up and walked to the window, watching Amanda's car disappear around the corner. She'd run straight to James, telling him how strangely I'd behaved, how I must be plotting something. They'd worked themselves into a frenzy trying to figure out my angle, but they were looking in the wrong direction entirely. Opening my laptop, I checked my email. The confirmation I'd been waiting for had arrived. All the documentation was in order. Every transaction James had made in the past year, every account he tried to hide, every piece of evidence of his relationship with Olivia, all of it carefully cataloged and verified. I opened the safe hidden behind our wedding photo, ironic placement, really, and pulled out the small leather notebook where I kept my own records. 6 months of careful planning, of playing the unsuspecting wife while quietly building my case. James thought he was so clever, planning his new life with Olivia, thinking he could simply walk away from our marriage without consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. Just accept that you've lost. I smiled at her message, thinking of the meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. James, Olivia, and their perfect plans were about to hit a wall they never saw coming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making a scene or fighting back. It's simply being prepared. Setting the phone down, I walked to our bedroom, soon to be just mine, and began methodically removing James' expensive suits from the closet. He'd want these for his new life with Olivia. I folded each one carefully, remembering the day I'd found the first hint of his betrayal. A receipt for a diamond bracelet I'd never received, tucked into one of these very suit pockets. That day had changed everything, but instead of confronting him, I'd started planning. James always underestimated me, treated me like I was naive, easily manipulated. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. I heard my phone buzz again, probably another gloating message from Amanda. Opening my dresser drawer, I pulled out the wedding invitation Amanda had so gleefully waved in my face. Next to it, I placed the file Mr. Wilson had prepared. The contrast was almost poetic, their elaborate plans for a future that was about to implode, and my simple documentation that would tear it all apart. Time to show them what nothing looks like, I whispered to myself, closing the drawer with a soft click. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my favorite charcoal gray suit, a gift from James during happier times. By 9 a.m., I was seated in Mr. Wilson's office, reviewing the final details of our plan. They should be arriving any minute, he said, arranging the documents on his polished mahogany desk. James believes this is a standard meeting about his new property purchase with Olivia. Right on cue, we heard voices in the hallway. James entered first, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw me. Olivia followed, then Amanda, who must have invited herself along to witness what she thought would be my humiliation. "What is she doing here?" Amanda demanded, while James's face darkened with anger. "Sophia," he said coldly, "this is a private meeting. You need to leave." Mr. Wilson stood, his expression professional but firm. "Actually, Mrs. Martinez is exactly where she needs to be. Please, everyone take a seat." "Mrs. Martinez?" Olivia questioned, her perfectly manicured hand gripping James's arm. "I thought you said the marriage was never legally registered." I watched James's face pale slightly. That had been his story to Olivia, that our marriage wasn't legal, that he was free to marry her without complications. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, suddenly less certain of her brother's carefully constructed narrative. "About that," Mr. Wilson began, opening a thick file. "I have here the legal marriage certificate for James and Sophia Martinez, dated 8 years ago. Properly filed, completely legitimate." "This is ridiculous," James interrupted, standing up. "We're here about the house purchase. I don't have time for whatever game Sophia is playing." "Ah, yes, the house purchase," Mr. Wilson continued calmly. "The luxury property you're attempting to buy with funds from your joint accounts with Mrs. Martinez. That's actually why we're all here today." I watched as understanding slowly dawned on their faces. James sank back into his chair, while Olivia's grip on his arm loosened. "Over the past 6 months, I spoke for the first time, my voice steady. James has been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into a private account. Money we earned together, money meant for our future. You had no right to track my finances," James snapped, but Mr. Wilson held up a hand. "As his legal wife, she had every right. Moreover, Mrs. Martinez has documented evidence of financial misconduct, including attempts to hide marital assets and make unauthorized transfers." Amanda's smugness had completely evaporated. "James," she whispered, "what did you do?" Mr. Wilson laid out document after document, bank statements, property records, evidence of James's attempts to hide our marital assets. Each piece of paper stripped away another layer of his carefully constructed deception. "The house you're planning to buy," I said quietly, "you're using our joint savings for the down payment. Money we saved together over 8 years of marriage. Did you tell Olivia that?" Olivia stood up abruptly, her face flushed. "You said it was your money," she accused James. "You said there wouldn't be any complications." "The complications," Mr. Wilson interjected, "are quite significant. Attempting to purchase property with marital assets while planning to deceive your legal spouse is fraud, Mr. Martinez." James' confidence had completely crumbled. "This isn't what it looks like," he tried, but even Amanda was shaking her head. "Mrs. Martinez isn't interested in pressing charges," Mr. Wilson continued. "What she wants is a fair and legal division of assets, starting with the immediate freezing of all joint accounts and a proper divorce settlement." I pulled out a document of my own, a comprehensive list of our marital assets and a proposed division that my lawyer had prepared. "I'm not trying to ruin anyone's happiness," I said, looking directly at James. "I just want what's fair." The room fell silent as James stared at the papers in front of him. His perfect plan was unraveling, and for once he had no smooth answers, no easy escape. "If you refuse to cooperate," Mr. Wilson added, "Mrs. Martinez is prepared to take this matter to court, where all of this would become public record." I watched as Olivia gathered her designer handbag, her engagement ring catching the morning light. "We'll discuss this later," she said to James, her voice icy. "I need to make some calls." As she left, Amanda stood up too, looking at her brother like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Mom's going to have a fit when she hears about this," she muttered, following Olivia out. James and I were left alone with Mr. Wilson. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 8 years of shared history and 6 months of betrayal. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Why all this secret planning?" I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket. "Would you have listened? Or would you have just found a way to hide everything better?" He had no answer for that. As I walked to the door, I turned back one last time. "I loved you, James. I deserved better than being discarded without a second thought." Leaving the office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The carefully constructed plan had worked perfectly, but more importantly, I finally stood up for myself. Amanda's words echoed in my mind. "You get nothing. She had been wrong about so many things, but mostly about what nothing really meant. The weeks following the meeting brought changes I hadn't expected. Olivia disappeared from the picture entirely, apparently deciding that a man who would lie about his marriage wasn't worth the drama. Amanda, surprisingly, was the first family member to reach out. "I owe you an apology," she said over coffee at a small cafe downtown. "I was horrible to you, and I was wrong." I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl. Why the change of heart? After the meeting, I did some digging, she admitted. Found out about all the lies James had told everyone, not just Olivia. He even lied to Mom about where the wedding money was coming from. She paused, looking genuinely remorseful. I was so busy being his loyal sister that I never stopped to question anything. The divorce proceedings moved forward smoothly after that. James, stripped of his bravado and schemes, agreed to a fair settlement. The joint accounts were divided equitably, and I kept our house, the one I'd helped pay for with years of hard work. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, deciding what to keep and what to let go, my phone buzzed with a text from James's mother. "Can we talk?" she asked. "There's something you should know." We met in her garden, the same place where James and I had taken our engagement photos years ago. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. "James's father was the same way," she said quietly, pruning her roses. "Always chasing something new, thinking he could outsmart everyone. I stayed, made excuses for him. You're stronger than I was." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. "This opens a safety deposit box at First National. I've been saving something for years, just in case any of my children needed it." She pressed the key into my hand. "Use it wisely." Inside the box, I found documentation of James's father's similar schemes, hidden accounts, attempted property transfers, patterns that James had unknowingly repeated. I didn't need it anymore, but the gesture meant something. His mother had seen the signs and had prepared, just like I had. 6 months after the meeting in Mr. Wilson's office, I stood in my newly redecorated living room, looking at the space that was now truly mine. The walls were painted in colors I'd chosen, decorated with art that spoke to me. No more compromise, no more dimming my preferences to match someone else's expectations. Amanda visited regularly now, our relationship transformed into something I never expected, genuine friendship. She helped me redesign the garden, turning it into a peaceful retreat. "You know what's funny?" she said one day as we planted new flowers. "James is the one who ended up with nothing. No wife, no girlfriend, no house. All because he thought he could have everything without consequences." I thought about that as I worked in my garden, about how nothing and everything could look so different depending on where you stood. I had lost a marriage but gained self-respect, lost a husband but found my strength. The final divorce papers arrived on a sunny Tuesday morning. As I signed them, I remembered Amanda's gleeful declaration that I would get nothing. She had been right, in a way. I got nothing of what they thought mattered. No drama, no revenge, no public scenes. Instead, I got everything that truly counted: my dignity, my independence, and the satisfaction of knowing I had handled things on my own terms. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party, my first as a single woman. Amanda was there, along with James's mother and a few close friends who had supported me throughout everything. We raised our glasses in a toast, not to endings or beginnings, but to truth and resilience. "To getting nothing," Amanda said with a wink, "and gaining everything." As laughter filled my home, I thought about the woman I was 6 months ago. Listening to Amanda's cruel announcement, she had no idea that her attempt to break me would only reveal how unbreakable I had become. Looking around at the warm faces of people who had seen my true worth, I realized that sometimes getting nothing was the best thing that could happen to you. It cleared the space for something better, something real. The garden lights twinkled through the windows as night fell, and I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of my story. Not as someone's wife, someone's sister-in-law, or someone's disappointment, but as myself, complete and whole, ready for whatever came next. And that was worth everything.